In this video, we are going to discuss the Jewish value of community and how Jewish life is lived out in the framework of shared covenantal community life. The big picture, the key is that here at Ruach Israel, our commitment to each other is above just about everything else that we do. First, Jewish community is meant to be covenantal in nature. We are in covenant with each other because God is in covenant with us. The concept of shared covenant in community is critical. I see this all the time. People leave their faith communities because the leadership changes or they feel like their needs aren't being met. Creating a real lasting community is more than coming to receive what community leaders have to offer. It's what you are called to create, what you are called to invest in and to build. If you are called to be in our community at Ruach, you are called to build and to create community with others at Ruach Israel. If you aren't finding friendships, invest in them. We want a community of community builders, and that's where the joy is. The key is that we place commitment to one another as one of our top priorities in life. It is the only way to cultivate real, authentic, and meaningful community. Second, Jewish life is meant to be lived out in a communal way. Most matters of Jewish life, the Jewish basics that we have been covering, are meant to be lived out together and not only observed alone. Our Jewish life should bring us together and never take us apart. Shabbat brings us together. For us at Ruach Israel, shared Jewish life means that we must prioritize coming together to live these out. Shabbat, holy days, life cycle events, community service projects. The preparation and work toward these events become community as much as the service or the holy day itself. In our hierarchy of values, we should prioritize community involvement within Jewish life. So what does that mean? We drive on Shabbat because the nature of our communities today would make it impossible to gather as a Messianic Jewish community otherwise. If I chose not to drive on Shabbat because of a preference, I would be alone and would not be building community together. Now, that said, we in our family only drive on Shabbat for community purposes. It's like a community sanctified exception that we have, that we hold because of the high value that we place on community. So we drive to go to services, to visit someone in our community, but we wouldn't go elsewhere. We would also avoid traveling on Shabbat if possible. In the past, our family has gone through different iterations of this. We have traveled on Shabbat when it seemed to us to be impractical not to. But every time we did, and this was for years and years, we felt weakened by it. So last summer we had an extended vacation where we had to leave a rental home with extended family on a Friday afternoon. So we chose to drive an hour toward home and then stay in a hotel over Shabbat rather than plow through the evening and get home late at night. The result for our family was wonderful. We had a warm and joy-filled Shabbat dinner in our hotel room. We zoomed into Shabbat services in the morning and spent lots of time relaxing during the day. After sun went down on Saturday night, we went home blessed because of the window of Shabbat that we had taken and carved out. Now, that worked because we were on Zoom for services anyway, so we could zoom in from the hotel room. That was because of COVID. But if not, I think we would have left our vacation a day earlier or earlier in the morning to be home in time for a Shabbat dinner at home so we could be present with our community on Shabbat. See, we must prioritize coming together to worship and live out of our commitment in God to each other. Often the guidelines and framework of Jewish life actually serve to bring us together and bring God's blessings more fully into our lives. Third, I want to mention that we need to place a value on community practice rather than our own individual practice. Along these lines, living Jewishly is not so much about your own individual sensibilities, but about you being a part of your community practice. That's why we have a rabbinical council working hard on standards of observance that are meaningful and yet livable within the framework of the lives that most of us live. I have seen in the past that when a person attempts to be significantly more observant than our community at Ruach Israel can accommodate in a collective communal way, for example, actually can be a source of division. And in the same way, the opposite is true. Take Shabbat as another example. If a family does not prioritize Shabbat as our community does, they will schedule all kinds of events, sports and this and that on Shabbat afternoons, and even if they make it to services, they'll be off and won't be able to spend time during Oneg and spend time engaging in community life because of a sporting event or a party or something like that in the afternoon. Consider the community that we create when Shabbat is Shabbat, a day set aside to put to rest all of the ordinary happenings of the week, to come together as a community in covenantal relationship with God and with each other. At Ruach, we work hard to cast a big tent where we can accommodate a wide range of practice among our members. We're not judging people for their Jewish observance. At the same time, again, Jewish observance becomes the framework for how we build authentic community. So while we do our best to cast a big tent, if you will, we also ask of each other that we find a place within that tent. Again, because of the value of being together. Next, I want to emphasize that Jewish life is not about entering the covenant, but about living out the covenant together. I've said this a number of times in our class, but it's worth just reiterating again and again because of our tendency to take the things that we do in our lives and use them as a checklist, if you will, for approval or brownie points with God. The Jewish life is not about brownie points. It's not about doing this tradition or that tradition. It's about being within Jewish life, not necessarily doing Jewish life perfectly. In fact, I think that sometimes by trying to do too much at the wrong times, we actually can lose the heart behind what we're doing. There have been times when I felt that I needed to do less because my heart hadn't caught up. Or because it wasn't best for my family or our community. And then there have been times when I felt like I needed to do a bit more for the same reasons. Israel means wrestling with God. We are supposed to wrestle through Jewish life together. Let me tell you a quick story about my past. This was years ago when I was just learning and growing in the basics of Jewish life. And I had just learned that you are not supposed to blow out your Shabbat candles because we are explicitly commanded in the Torah not to light or extinguish a flame on Shabbat. So I was living at my parents' house, and my friend who was also on this journey with me was there. We were celebrating Shabbat together, and the problem was that I had lit those really big candles as opposed to the little ones that burn out in a few hours, those large dinner candles. And so at the close of the evening, my father asked me to please blow out the candles before we went to bed. So forgetting about the restriction, I agreed. And then a bit later, after he and I had finished our evening, I got up and just blew out the first candle. My friend looked at me wide-eyed and said, "What are you doing? You blew out the candle." And it was terrific. We stayed up with one candle burning and one out. We stayed up until 2-3 in the morning arguing about this. I felt that I had to honor my father. It was my fault because I hadn't prepared correctly, and the right thing to do was to blow out the candle. However, from his perspective, we were commanded not to blow out the candle, and this was really important. Maybe there were other things we could do, like put it in the sink. Finally, we were so exhausted at the end, and we couldn't debate any longer, and in a moving display of compassion, my friend got up and blew out the other candle for me. Now, as I reflect back on this happy moment, what stands out to me was not the technicalities of whether honoring my parents was a value above the Torah instruction not to extinguish a flame. There probably were a dozen options that we didn't even consider. The real value was that we wrestled with it together, that we cared at that moment about God's covenant and about our commitment to each other at the same time. So we wrestled with it till 2 or 3 in the morning. For me, that was a special moment. For me, that is what Jewish life is about. Perhaps like Jacob wrestled with God before being renamed Israel, I think that Jewish life is supposed to be a wrestling at times. But we wrestle together within God's covenant and in his covenant with each other. Jewish life in the community at Ruach Israel should never be stagnant or stale. If it is, it's time to start community building and community stretching. It is not on others in our community to do this. Perhaps there is a need left unmet just for you to meet. So let's come together at Ruach Israel in shared covenantal Messianic Jewish life. Let's wrestle together, love each other, and commit to each other, and build Messianic Jewish community together.